Nation, Guru Nation, Guru Nation, Guru Nation. Guru Nation, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, share if you're listening. Same thing. Last video like this, I did about CRC responsibilities. I didn't actually do like fancy with Daniel here and all that, but it was just myself. Maybe it was like 10 minutes. And I put in the comments if you guys want more in-depth, let me know. So I'm going to do that one next. For this one, I'm going to do it in-depth on CRA job responsibilities. So it's not unlike CRC. So CRA is Clinical Research Associate. The only difference is there's no patient interaction with CRA. On the rare occasion, like on a rare study, a CRA will observe, in the case of a surgery, a CRA will observe the surgery. But as far as like regular, like COPD, asthma, depression, obesity, diabetes, like 90% of the trials, 95% of the trials maybe, CRAs don't even observe the patients. Like the only way they know the patients is through the source documents and maybe through the medical records of that patient's case history. So they'll look at medical records, they'll look at, of course, the source documentation. But just like we discussed about CRCs, where CRCs are responsible for source, regulatory, investigational product accountability. Honestly, CRCs are responsible for more than CRAs, but CRAs go deeper on certain things, especially when it comes to like the three core things CRAs do, which is source, regulatory, and investigational product accountability. So there are also other responsibilities like selecting a site, doing a site selection visit, and then closing out a site, doing a closeout visit. But other than those two other things, like site selection visit, usually they don't even have the main CRAs for a study do the site selection visits. It'll usually be either a more junior or a very senior CRA doing site selection visits. The regular CRAs, they'll do site visits. So they'll start out from site initiation visit and they'll go all the way through closeout. And just those three pillars of work are what the CRA job responsibility is. So it's source, regulatory, and investigational product accountability, and everything that goes in between as far as like how those three things integrate at the clinic level, how they interweave with each other in regards to things like site inventory, site compliance with the protocol, site compliance with a good clinical practice, patient recruitment, things like that. Again, they don't actually do those things. They make sure the site is doing those things well. So CRAs won't recruit patients, but CRAs will talk to sites about, hey, what can we do? What can the sponsor do to assist you in recruiting more or recruiting better? What kind of best practices can maybe we help you with? Here's some suggestions. And they'll usually take back the responses from the site and give it to the sponsor vis-a-vis their lead CRA. And that's where they're kind of like the bridge between the site and the sponsor. And they have deliverables after every monitoring visit. Their deliverable is their trip report or their monitoring visit report. However, the CRO calls it. They're colloquially known as trip reports, but in reality, they're interim monitoring visit reports, or whatever kind of monitoring visit it was, monitoring report for that particular visit. So if it's a site initiation visit report, it's a SIV report. If it's a monitoring visit report, it's a interim monitoring visit. So it's important that CRAs understand sites. It's important that CRAs have empathy and know what sites are going through. Us at the site here, I think we have 2 staff members still here right now. Lana's in the room. Grecia's screening in another room, a patient right now. But they know if I were to bring them in here and ask them, which I have done, they would tell you. They can tell right away which monitors were coordinators before and which weren't, because it's very clear how they communicate to sites, whether they have empathy or not for that site. And you have more empathy generally if you've been in that coordinator situation. So I think the CRC CRA interactions and dynamics is the most important one in our industry, arguably. I mean, of course, CRC and patient interaction super important, but from the stakeholders in the space, if you exclude the patients, the CRC and the CRAs really are the workhorses for this entire clinical research industry. Like, these are the two workhorses, the CRC at the site level, the CRA at the CRO or sponsor level. So again, source, regulatory, and investigational product accountability with an interweaving of site communication, which are things like empathy, also logistical assistance, like, hey, I notice you're out of lab kits, or I notice you are out of electrodes, or I notice you are out of other supplies, like we have some wearables for some studies, or investigational product. Like, we're going to get into an investigational product because that's the third pillar, but let's get into it with the source. So with the source data review and source data verification. Now, source data verification is very simple. You wouldn't need an advanced degree to do source data verification. Matter of fact, a child could do it, probably, like 8 years and older. It's very simple. It's what's on the source. Like, if you put on the source the patient is 5 feet 11 inches, and you look on the EDC where the data is entered for the study, right? So sites enter data on their source at the site, but every site across the country can use a different kind of source. But the EDC is where all the data goes from all the sites. That's uniform. No matter what kind of source the sites are using, it goes into one place that's like a database. It's called EDC. This is where the CRAs actually look at the data there and make sure it matches the data at the site source. So again, if you're putting down on your source a patient is 5'11", it's not that hard to check on the EDC and make sure it's 5'11". And if you see 5'10", you're going to query it and say source says 5'11". That's like very simple stuff. You don't need an advanced degree to do it. It's literally just, I really think AI will be able to do that soon, especially as sites are starting to utilize electronic source now, like CRA. Shout out to CRA, one of our sponsors for this podcast. So SDV, which is source data verification, just like the name implies, is what CRA, one of their main responsibilities. But that's, again, very simple. You don't even need, like, I used to bring my assistants with me when I was a contract CRA. I got sponsor approval, by the way, so don't try to pin this on me later. But I used to bring my assistants with me, and they would do the source data verification. Where I earned my money and where your experience matters is in the source data review. And this is where a lot of CRAs drop the ball, especially when they are overworked. So again, it's not hard to say, okay, 5'11", 210 pounds, 210 pounds. They came in on May 1st. It shows May 1st here. That's easy stuff. The hard stuff is May 1st out of window for this visit? Well, I don't know. Let's look at the protocol. Protocol says they have to come within 2 weeks plus or minus 3 days from their last visit. So now you actually have to do some thinking, right? Is May 1st 2 weeks plus or minus 3 days from the last visit? I don't know. Let me go look at the last visit. The last visit said April 15th. Yes, looks like it's correct. Okay, now what you're doing is source data review. The EDC, the source data verification, won't tell you about protocol compliance. It won't tell you about GCP compliance. Source data verification is only showing you that what's on the source is what's in the EDC. Source data review tells you what's on the source is compliant with the protocol. Another thing, we just had a case where we had a potential patient he showed a lab for possible pancreatitis. We think that is actually an error with the lab. We are, as a good site would do, redrawing the labs. We are ordering an MRI with contrast for the abdomen to see if that's actually pancreatitis. We're following the protocol and we're following good clinical practice. Now, let's assume the same situation, but the site doesn't do that. If the CRA doesn't know that the site is supposed to do this, and they don't flag it, and the site doesn't do it, that's actually not compliant with GCP, and that's not compliant with the protocol, because the protocol states and GCP states patient safety comes first. And with most protocols, there's adverse events of special interest, and there's certain procedures you've got to follow if certain lab results occur this way, or if protocol states something happened. And sometimes it's like very difficult to actually see it because it's like buried in a footnote. But if the lipase is above 3 times upper limit of normal, you've got to do this. Like those things which are buried, those are very important things which are patient safety issues, are often buried in like tables and footnotes and charts. CRAs need to make sure the site's actually doing that. So it's not enough to just say, okay, well, they put lipase as this value on the source and it's what they put in the EDC. Well, what does that actually mean? Is it out of range? Did the PI assess for clinical significance? Did the PI and the site do what the protocol says you're supposed to do if something's above 3 times upper limit of normal, or whatever the case may be? I'm just using that as a particular example because it's something that we just experienced recently. That source data review and that level of detail comes from protocol mastery. You have to know the protocol. And here's where I believe the difference, one of the main difference between CRAs and CRCs is protocol mastery. Usually coordinators have 4 to 8 studies maybe that they're responsible for. CRAs usually have only 1 or 2 studies. Just the logic of the numbers tells you that the CRAs should know more about the protocol than the coordinators for the most part. I'm not arguing of who should know it better. Everyone should know it well if you're going to put patients in a study, but the CRAs should be the experts of the study. In reality, so should the coordinators, but the CRAs really are just focused on 1 or 2 protocols at the most, whereas coordinators are like 4 to 8. So if the CRA doesn't know these things, and because sometimes the CRA has to train the site, and that's where we get into a little bit of the regulatory, because part of regulatory, besides checking is the 1572 complete and accurate, are there any new sub-investigators that haven't been added to the 1572? Are there any sub-investigators that haven't signed the financial disclosure forms? Is the IRB application still active, or is it getting close to being expired? Are the deviations being recorded? Like, you start getting into training of the site, which is still a regulatory aspect because training is part of regulatory. CRA should, if the CRA notices that the site is continuously missing things or forgetting to do things, it's their responsibility to retrain the site, and it's their responsibility to put it in their report, in their trip report, and communicate and document to the sponsor, hey, the site's not compliant, but I'm aware of it, and I'm catching it, and here's the report. The ball's in your court now, sponsor, as to what to do. But here's what I've done. I've retrained the site. We filled out a training log. I've discussed with the PI. I've discussed with the coordinator. You've done your job as a CRA in that case. You can't force the site to do things. Like, they're going to do things their way regardless. But if you have enough influence over the site, you can actually train them. A lot of these coordinators are overworked, so they're not purposely violating the protocol. they didn't know that they were supposed to do it that way. And a lot of these PIs are just looking at labs and safety. They're not necessarily looking at the finer details of the protocol. So that's where the CRAs come in. And that's where source and regulatory kind of overlap, especially when it comes to the training aspect. So this is where, again, like the empathy and the emotional intelligence of the CRA has to come in, because it's one thing to catch something, and it's another thing to like repeatedly point out, hey, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, you did this wrong. It's all another skill set to prevent future errors from occurring and prevent deviations from occurring. And sometimes you get stuck with a bad site, no matter how much training and pointing out you do. They don't change their ways. It's up to the sponsor now. Hey, issue a screening hold. You've done your job as a CRA. Remember, your trip reports are put in the trial master file. Those are FDA auditable. So you don't want to be, just like a site gets audited, CRAs do get audited too, because when FDA auditor comes into a site, they oftentimes look at the follow-up letters, and then if they want to, they can audit the trial master file of the CRO. And that's where they will find like CRAs who miss things as well. And if CRAs miss things, the sponsors will know which CRA that is, and they will probably not use that CRA, even if it's not their own employee, on a future trial. And that just means that that CRO has one less CRA they can allocate to a certain study. So it's really important that you make sure you as the CRA are the expert on the protocol, because not just to catch things for compliance and to prevent deviations, or to record deviations when they already have happened, or to have sites perhaps do CAPA plans or trainings, retraining the site, but to make sure that future errors don't occur. And ultimately, it's to keep patients safe too, because again, it is the primary responsibility of the PI and the site to keep patients safe, but it is the CRA is really the last line of defense between patient safety being adhered to or not. Most sites will do the right thing, but every now and then you'll have a site that just, maybe they put a brand new coordinator on the trial. The coordinator doesn't know that this lab result means you have to do this. The PI overlooked it, and all of a sudden you've got patient safety issue because the patients in the study, unmonitored, unsupervised, maybe the dose of the IP should have been decreased or stopped, and instead things are going on as normal. That could be dangerous for the patient. And this is where CRA is actually responsible for patient safety as well. Indirectly, they can't communicate with the patient, but they can communicate to the patient vis-a-vis the coordinator. So now we get into IP accountability, which is also the third pillar of CRA responsibilities. And IP accountability is the patient compliant with their study drug? Is the patient being dosed the right study drug? Believe it or not, look, sites are so busy. We've almost had a few close calls here at Yuma Clinical Trials. Thank God we didn't. Patients being dosed with the wrong medicine. When I monitored a study as a contract CRA in 2018. I believe it was 2018. This was a stem cell study. The site, it was meant to be a study where you take the stem cell you take the blood sample from the patient. The blood sample got made into an investigational product that is meant to be put back into that patient for the rest of the study. This site gave someone else's stem cells to another patient. And that is a huge, the patient could have died. Worst case scenario, that patient could have died. Luckily, nothing happened. But you never know how someone's autoimmune system's going to work against someone else's stem cells. In this case, nothing happened, but that's a huge GCP. That's a huge GCP deviation, protocol deviation, CAPA plan. That's part of investigational product accountability. Now, I didn't even have to catch that. The sponsor and the site caught that, but it was too late. I had to come in there and fix it as a CRA and say, hey, here's what we're going to do going forward, and retrain the site and all this stuff I discussed earlier. But investigation of product accountability is huge. First of all, make sure they're taking the right medications. Make sure the right dose is being given. So and all these things are double blind, but you're basically going by IP numbers. Make sure the temperature hasn't gone through any excursions for the IP. Make sure that the patients are correctly reporting what they're taking. A lot of times the coordinator will not count, like in the case of pills, the coordinator will not count or do the math properly of the percentage compliant that the patient was based on the pills they were supposed to take versus the pills that they returned. It's very easy to mess up on the math. That's where a CRA comes in and has to actually double check. They said the patient was 100% compliant. Let me see. Well, actually they weren't, because they returned 13 pills. They were only supposed to return 12. So that means they took an extra pill, or they didn't take an extra pill. So they're not 100% compliant. They're whatever the math would be, like 98% compliant. So those kind of things are important too. And you do see like IP accountability errors a lot as far as percent compliant. Now, some protocols have a specified percentage compliance. So patient must be 75% compliant, or else they need to be retrained. And if they continue to fail to be compliant, they need to be withdrawn from the study. So if you're not checking the IP accountability as a CRA and making sure, hey, this is like the patient is at least meeting 75% compliance. If you're just trusting that the site, whatever the site puts, yeah, they're 80% compliant, they're 90. If you're not actually counting and making sure, what if the site's doing math wrong? Like I've seen my own coordinators when they're new not do the IP accountability properly, and I had to go in there and teach them, no, this is actually not 100% compliant. This was like 80. Then hopefully over time they learn, but you as a CRA, you don't know what you're getting into. You're going to new sites all the time. You don't know, you can't trust what the CRCs are writing down on their source. You got to actually get in there and count the pills. And a lot of CRAs don't do this because they're too busy with the source data review, with the regulatory, and also they tend to put IP accountability off until time for database lock or time for a closeout visit. And then they realize that, hey, I never did any IP accountability. And then they realize towards the end of the study, wow, this site has all these compliance deviations, and now we got to file all these protocol deviations, and it's just not a good thing. This is what accumulates stress to your workload as a CRA, and also you're doing a disservice to the patients, to the site, and to the sponsor. So it gets very tedious. Those are the main responsibilities of a CRA. This could easily be a 2-hour video. Matter of fact, just like the CRC one, let me know if you want a 1 or 2 hour video on this where I go in depth in the comments. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Bye-bye. Hey, if you guys like that kind of content, make sure you like, subscribe, comment, share. Stay tuned for more videos.